Hello and welcome to FortinetLIVE. I'm Derek Manky, and joining me today is Renee Tarun, Deputy CISO and Vice President Information Security. How are you doing, Renee?
Great, Derek. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to chat with you again. So I wanted we've been talking about this for a while, and as you know, with FortiGuard Labs, we released our second half 2021 threat landscape report, and since then, we're continuing to see some key trends on the threat landscape. As you know, we're also living in this extended state of heightened security, as we say, worldwide. And some of these drivers that we're seeing behind this, and the why should we be in this? Why are we in the heightened state of security? Some of the drivers we pointed out in the threat landscape report were sophistication. So I wanted to talk to you about that of threats, as well as speed too. Some unprecedented speed that we're seeing threats move at in terms of how quickly cyber criminals and attackers are, capitalizing on fresh zero-day vulnerabilities. As an example, we're seeing more and more diversity and sophistication of, ransomware threats. As an example, aggressive ransomware, and then all the other problems on the APT side too. So, Renee, you interface with CISOs worldwide on a daily basis, and I know you've had this conversation a lot before. So I just wanted to ask you, what's been sort of front in mind and center in these conversations when you're talking about the heightened security issue?
Yeah, I think for a lot of CISOs, I mean, the concern is, like you said, Derek, it's, the number of sophistication of threats, they're definitely getting more sophisticated. The number of entry points into networks and organizations, that really the threat landscape, the platform and area that where CISOs, because again, they're having to not only protect their stuff on-prem, in cloud, multiple clouds. And so really the entire environment that they have to protect, their concern is, because the adversary is moving at speed and scale and they have so much on their plate to protect, the concern is keeping pace with the adversaries, as the adversaries continue to increase their sophistication. And like you said, we're seeing adversaries using more automation in their attacks, being able to attack, a wide variety of targets simultaneously, building those scalable platforms to launch their attacks, and leveraging automation and AI against us. And so for a lot of CISOs, it's trying to stay that one step ahead, and making sure that, they're keeping up to date with, the latest trends, and ensuring that they're trying to do some of the things at speed and scale like the adversaries are.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like the old saying goes, you don't want to bring a knife to a gunfight, right? But the interesting thing is, here there's a lot of strategic things that can be done defensively to help protect against the growing offense that we see, especially with the speed, the sophistication and scale. That's something I'm seeing too with these cyber crime groups. We've referred to this as advanced persistent cyber crime, where they're focusing, acting in more APT-like fashion. A lot of organizations would say in the past, why would I be a victim or a target, say, of a nation state group or an APT actor? But in reality, what we're seeing on the threat landscape with FortiGuard Labs is this convergence. Just like we're seeing the convergence of networking and security, the convergence also of cyber crime, which is actually a lion's share of activity we're seeing with, APT-like weaponization of as I said, zero-day vulnerabilities and threats. So it's a real threat, right? It's not just this, it could happen one day, right? It's actually activity that we're seeing happen on a daily basis. We've already put out five threat signals this year, just in Q1, on Wiper ransomware as an example, right? More destructive type trends that are happening from the ransomware and cybercrime side. And I'm sure that's also been a concern when you talk to CISOs too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for a lot of organizations, some are coming to that reality. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Something's bad is going to be happening into their environments. And so from my perspective, what's going to separate the good, the bad from the ugly is really how well organizations are prepared. And like you said, putting some of those, defensive mechanisms in place, but also ensuring that they have the right, capabilities for doing some detection and monitoring, and then the right response capabilities in there. And a lot of that requires leveraging, automation and AI. For a lot of organizations, there's this major cyber, skills gap. And so, the organizations are really trying to look at leveraging, some of the technologies to really kind of help them. But a lot of it also comes down to having, it's not only having the good, technology in place, but you also have some that have good processes in place. Kind of like I said, if something bad does happen, organizations really need to have, a good incident response plan to respond to something bad happens, and also a good recovery plan. So if they do lose operations, they lose productivity, how can they get back up and running as quickly as possible? And similar to, looking on some of that monitoring, leveraging some of the technologies like sandboxing, because again, we're still seeing, like you said, a lot of ransomware is coming in. And that's all being driven majority by social engineering attacks. So that's either coming in as those email phishing or spear phishing attacks or even whaling attacks. And so doing things like sandboxing and having those detonation chambers in place so that you can really, see what something a malicious file is before they activate it are some of those proactive steps. And that's where organizations really kind of need to get to is focusing on doing more some of those proactive strategies. And training is another big piece for organizations, because as the adversary steps up their game and changes their techniques and tactics, we really need to be changing, educating our workforce on how, they can defend themselves when they start seeing these things, these, malicious messages coming into their inbox and, being targeted.
Yeah, and you can't protect against what you can't see, and this gets it in this conversation that we've had many times in the past on the known knowns, the unknown knowns, and then the unknown unknowns, right? Which are really the zero-day threats, right? Because we have this growing amount of vectors, different ways that attackers can get into systems. It's not just about using the browser anymore, as an example, or let's say a PDF reader, right? That attack surface keeps growing, and there's new ways through more attack avenues, right, that they're being able to use to get into systems, so that the visibility, especially for detonation, as you said, sandboxing, detonation, deception technology is another one of those too, right, where you can actually deploy decoys and try to find potential new attack activity, trap that also. The being able to respond to these at speed, I think, is also important, because another disturbing trend that we're seeing is that the dwell time, so this is how long threats actually, when they get on a system, they can actually persist, like an advanced persistent threat on that system. It hasn't been going in the right direction. That dwell time has actually increased on average year over year over the past, I think, 2 or 3 years, especially, if we look at the Ponemine Institute cost of a data breach report and also statistics and threat modeling we do with FortiGuard labs. And so, it's really important to be able to detect that threat, reduce that dwell time, that living window that it has, so that the risk and damage is decreased, and also to be able to stop it up front. So that zero-day, you talked about the detonation and inline sandboxing as an example, being able to stop it before the damage is done is really important, because the other trend that we're seeing with FortiGuard Labs, going back to that speed conversation, is that threats are the attack window. So that whole life cycle from doing, blueprinting, reconnaissance, penetration of a system, exfiltration of data, that window is shrinking. It's the opposite end, right? It's actually happening quicker, meaning they can be in and out of a system, exfiltrate data on a much quicker scale than before. So being able to mitigate that, detect those threats, and stop it before that happens at speed and scale is actually incredibly important today.
Absolutely. And you bring up a good point about the deception technologies. I've always been a really big proponent of the deception technologies.
Yeah.
Because like you said, from my perspective, you want to be able to either slow the adversary down, confuse the adversary, or frustrate the adversary so that they either go bother somebody else, or, they do something that tip their hands to allow you to have that insight and knowledge that, hey, there is something fishy going on inside your network. And so, giving you a tip off that something's bad's going on. But for some organizations, they think, yep, that's on my roadmap. Yep, that's later stage. But for my philosophy is, a lot of organizations want to kind of build their fortress, but there's nothing worse than building your fortress just to find out at the end you've got rats already running around your walls. So from my perspective, having some of those technologies that, like deception, in place that allows you to, if there's someone trying to do laterally or access things they shouldn't be, even from an insider threat perspective, we've seen the number of insider threat attacks also going up as of late. And so being able to, give you that, my idea of early warning indications, to me, I think that's one step ahead of, keeping ahead of the adversaries. But also, again, we're still seeing a lot of attacks, successful attacks being done by simply, what I call the low-hanging fruit, unpatched systems. And so, it's coming down to also ensuring that you do some of that basics, that good cyber hygiene. I know for a lot of organizations, sometimes it's trying to keep up, and, their system admins are, overworked already. But that's going to be an advantage to the adversary. It's kind of like leaving your doors and windows unlocked at night. And if you leave it unlocked, someone's going to eventually try and, come in and test it. So again, organizations, it really takes those proactive strategies of having a good vulnerability patch management process in place. And so some of those type processes in place. So it does take that combination of, having strong people, processes and technology in place. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately, in cybersecurity in our business. Wish there was. I wish Fortinet would create it. It would make all of our lives easier. But at the end of the day, it takes a combination of all three of those things in the cyber world.
Yeah, and that really is best practice, right, when it comes to cyber hygiene. And you mentioned the low-hanging fruit. That's always been a challenge, and that continues to be. Last year, NIST and the MBD tracked over 20,000 new CVEs. That was a net new record. Those are net new on top of what was, reported the year prior, right? And so the patch management discussion that we always have is just one of those fundamentals, right, that we need to keep on talking about. And like I said, that's not the silver bullet, no, but it is part of that holistic strategy. And the nice thing about, I completely agree with you on the training and the skills gap. I think the most effective way to approach that is you have to free those people up. You have to have the cycles, right, so that they can actually spend more time on training. How do you do that? You can replace what I call the mundane or the day-to-day tasks of, let's say, of a SOC analyst, right, who's typically looking at logs, analyzing a log, and then creating policies because of that, right? Or having to look at detections from a sandbox and realize, hey, for some reason this policy wasn't created and this malware actually went through, so now I got to hunt it down and track it. All of that can be replaced, right, with integration orchestration, the security fabric, and threat intelligence, of course. Well, their cycles can be refactored for things like training as well. So I think that's an effective model, right? Also, sort of this next generation model, how we approach the SOC too.
Absolutely. That the SOAR brings in a whole next level of sophistication into your security operations center, and it not only frees up your analysts to work on higher priority things, and also upskill their abilities, but also it helps you in that response time. When you take those playbooks and you put in automated responses, again, it goes back to doing things at network speed and scale. It takes manual speed in today's environment is just no longer a sufficient strategy. So we got to be leveraging automation and AI. Because, as I said before, the adversary is using it against us. And so we need to be leveraging that in our arsenal as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the word playbook too, because we always have to remember that this to the adversary, they have a strategy of their own, right? They have a playbook that they've created. And going back to, I completely agree with you, going back to the deception technology, I'm also a big fan, because not only when you can trap them literally in their tracks, right, during an attack, yes, it does help to detect and identify and give that early warning, like you said. But you also got to think that you mentioned it slows them down. I love that thought, as it actually forces them to go back to the drawing board, saying, "Wait, I've hit the wrong target here. I've got to go back and revise my playbook," which, of course, is a big cost to the adversary, right? We always have to consider this as the cost on their model too. So it's a pretty effective approach when you combine those elements.
Absolutely. And even some of the next generation, deception technology even allows you to incorporate some response activities into that as well. So it does help you even and take it to the next layer. But again, like you said, it's, the adversaries will constantly revise their playbooks. And also we're seeing a lot of them take a multi-pronged approach, so leveraging a spear phishing attack as well as launching DDoS attacks. So they're trying multiple techniques and tactics simultaneously and almost doing kind of like a distraction technique, and doing something overt so that security operations and network operation centers are responding, but then also going into looking at other backdoors that may not necessarily be being focused on right away, and kind of go into those vulnerabilities that haven't been patched and taking advantage of them.
Yeah, and we also have to remember there's a lot more stakeholders out there on the adversary side as well too. We're seeing more like the affiliate model, the ransom as a service model as an example. Each individual has their own their own idea or flavor of attack that they would like to use, and that's exactly what's driving what you just said, right? It's not just one attempt, multiple, and unfortunately different avenues. But the good news, bad news, as we talk about, I think this is a good news conversation, right? Because yes, we always talk, we know the threat is there. We talk about that all of the time, but everything, like you said, there, bad news is there is no silver bullet, but the good news is there's a lot of good technology out there that can be combined holistically. All the stuff that we talked about, all the way down from, the people, not just the technology piece, but the people process technology. All that together is very effective against everything that we've been talking about.
Absolutely. And there's also a lot of free training out there. And Fortinet offers its training academy out there free. So if organizations can lever, that free training to help, especially on the people side. There are definitely things out there that organizations can be done, because like you said, it is scary out there right now, because again, there's a low entry barrier to getting into the adversary side, because again, we see a lot of the kits and stuff and the malware being bought and sold like a commodity. So you don't necessarily need the sophisticated, coding skills to become a hacker. And so that's why, you're seeing more and more groups. I think it was one of your last reports, you even said that you've seen more groups now coming in and activating, doing things on the ransomware and wipeware than we've ever seen in the past. And I think those numbers are only going to continue to grow.
Yep, absolutely. So the time is now. It's always a good time, right, to talk about this in the heightened security.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Renee, thanks so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I know you're very busy, as we all are monitoring. We'll continue to monitor this heightened state of security. We're on it 24/7, 365 at FortiGuard Labs, of course. Thanks again for your time, Renee.
Thanks, Derek. It's always a pleasure.
All right. It's Derek Manky with FortinetLIVE signing off.